Hello, everyone. According to my clock, it is 11 o'clock, 11 o'clock on the West Coast, which is where Sarah and I are broadcasting from today. And we are very excited to welcome you today to our presentation on taking your SEL program from good to great. I've done this presentation at a couple of conferences now, and I'm really excited to bring this to our audience here today. Between Sarah and I, we have been working with school districts for, I think with the two of us combined, probably over 20 years doing SEL work with school districts. And we have seen a lot of SEL implementations, and I think many of them have room to grow and get better. And so that's one of the things we really wanted to be able to share with you today. We know that many of your schools are doing SEL. Many of your schools have our second step program. And I'm guessing that the reason why you are joining us today is because you feel like the program you have in your school or district really has some room to grow. And I think that that's probably true because SEL work is really, it's never done in the sense that there's always really more we can do. And so today, Sarah and I are hoping to share with you lots of really great ideas to do that. So we are very excited to have you here today, and we're going to start out with some quick introductions. And we're going to be sharing with you some of the four components of what we consider to be holistic SEL. We're going to talk about some of the implementation challenges and give you some practical ideas for taking your SEL program from good to great. But before we do that, I just wanted to introduce myself and my colleague, Sarah Rubin. We are going to be monitoring the chat box today, so we would love for you to interact with us there. And I guess I'll start with myself. My name's Amy Walker, and I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Committee for Children. I have been at Committee for Children for many years, and I have had the opportunity to work with so many wonderful educators and schools and districts that are doing SEL and doing Second Step. And I'm really, really happy to share with you today some of the insights and ideas that I have learned from all the years of working with schools that can help you with your implementations. And also joining me today is my colleague, Sarah Rubin.
Thank you, Amy. I'm Sarah Rubin, and I am a success manager. I've been here also for a number of years, not quite as long as Amy. But we together, it's really great to be here together to work with you. I'm excited about working with Amy and helping you all bring your SEL programs to the next level.
Yes, and you can see it from Sarah's title. She is a success manager at Committee for Children. She's one of a whole team of people we have whose jobs are to really support high quality implementation. And at the end of our presentation, we'll be sharing with you just our contact information and some of the ways you can reach out to us so that we can help you on a more individual basis if you have things you want to talk with about us in terms of your school or district and how we could help you really bring up the fidelity of your implementation to get the best outcomes from your Second Step program or your SEL implementation in general. But before I dive into the content, I wanted to share a little bit with you about Committee for Children. Like I said in the beginning, we are based in Seattle, Washington, which is where Sarah and I are broadcasting from today. We are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to foster the safety and well-being of children through social, emotional learning and development. We do a lot of advocacy work at both the state and the federal levels for policies and laws that support social, emotional learning schools, prevent bullying, and protect children. We estimate that our programs are currently reaching 20 million children in all 50 states and actually in many countries around the world as well. And in doing this work with so many kids over a 40-year history, we have learned a lot about doing SEL in schools, and we really hope to condense down some of what we've learned into this hour-long presentation to give you some ideas for how to do all the fabulous work that you are already doing even better. So I wanted to also share with you our equity statement and our land acknowledgement. We are very committed to recognizing, condemning, disrupting, and seek to rectify systemic injustices that create barriers to children's success. And we also realize that with a program like ours reaching 20 million kids, we are in a position to really impact great change in the world in schools and with all of the schools that are using our programs, and we take that responsibility very seriously. We also have a land acknowledgement we would like to share with you, that our offices sit on the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, past and present, specifically the first people of Seattle, Washington, the Duwamish tribe, which is where we are joining you from. And we would also like you to pause for a minute and think of the first people and the land that you are joining us from. I know you're all over the country right now. So Committee for Children, I think many of you probably know us by our Second Step program, which is our widely used and tried and tested SEL program that is used in thousands of schools all around the country in every type of community you can imagine. And we offer a holistic approach to building supportive communities for every child through social emotional learning. Our Second Step family of programs supports the whole child by building social emotional competence, addressing bullying, and helping protect children in school with resources that also support adult educators and extend beyond the classroom. So we have a lot of programs and resources that we have developed that can help you do SEL well. And also there are a lot of other great resources out there today. So we're going to be talking with you today more generally about SEL, and also we'll be sharing with you at the end some of the resources specifically around Second Step, but really we're going to be talking today about doing really good quality SEL in your schools and districts. So we are looking for a holistic approach to SEL, and we have really broken this down into 4 components that can help this help make this more easy to understand. So, what are we talking about when we're talking about holistic social emotional learning? We are talking about providing SEL throughout the child's day, reaching the child across developmental stages and throughout their school career, supporting educators' social emotional competencies and well-being, and supporting a positive implementation environment for your programs. So now I'm going to dive in deeper into each of these areas just to sort of talk about what this can look like. And what I'm going to be doing for the next few slides here is to be kind of painting a picture for our North Star. Like, what are we really looking at? When we're looking at, having an excellent quality whole school approach, doing all of these things, what does that look like? And then at the latter part of our presentation, we're going to be talking about some of the barriers you might have in your school to doing this level of SEL work, and how you might be able to overcome those to really fill in some of the gaps that you aren't currently reaching. So, holistic SEL provides SEL throughout the child's day. Research shows SEL should be embedded throughout the child's day, and learning is supported by opportunities to practice and apply concepts in a range of contexts and situations. And so what does this mean in practice? This means that you should not just be doing SEL at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays and having that be, a 1 hour a week thing that you do, and then really it's neglected for the rest of the week. So what does it look like in practice? It might include a universal classroom-based SEL curriculum that is reinforced in all parts of the school day. Our version of that program is Second Step. That's our SEL program. You might have another program. And I think also one of the things I wanted to touch on here is that we say, that SEL is not just a once a week lesson, but it also does need to be a once a week lesson, in the sense that I think, that you can do all these great things to reinforce SEL, but also you do need a point of your week where you are actually teaching explicit SEL skills. So I think you can kind of make the mistake on both ends. On one end, you could just be doing an SEL lesson where your counselor pops in once a week, teaches a lesson, and that's kind of the end of it. And that would be missing a lot of opportunities in terms of reinforcement. Other schools sometimes leave out the curriculum component, and they really try to create like this sort of surrounding SEL environment, but then they don't teach the explicit skills. So it needs to be both. You need to have the explicit skill instruction, and also you need to have that reinforcement embedded throughout the day and throughout the school. So Another thing is that I think one of the opportunities a lot of schools miss is intentional SEL program for out of school time environments. So I know that I guess all of you have an out of school time provider in your buildings or in your communities that many of your kids are attending. And so you're missing an opportunity to do SEL really well if you're not including your out of school time providers in your SEL work. With Second Step, many of you might not know that we, about a year ago, we released a version of Second Step, which was developed just for doing in out of school time environments. And for those of you that have other programs, also, whatever you're doing for your SEL program, I would really highly encourage you to be incorporating your out of school time providers into your work, because there's so many teachable moments in OST where all of the activities and games they're doing really can really help reinforce the skills that you're doing during the school day. So home communication and reinforcement. So I think I'm guessing all of you that are doing an SEL program, the SEL program that you're doing has a home link. It has a home connection piece where every week or every unit or however your program is broken down, there is a home component that involves families in the work that you're doing. And I am also guessing that many of you are not using those. So, if you're doing an SEL program, I am absolutely sure that program includes a home communication component. So be sure and use those, because they can really add on by having families helping to reinforce what you're doing during the day. Also reinforcement. I know with Second Step, we have lots of activities embedded in Second Step that can help you bring Second Step into the rest of your school day, where you can be modeling those activities, where you can be playing the songs and doing the games and, having extra sets of posters up in the hallway and also training your playground staff, training your librarians and your PE teachers and your assistant principals and everybody on the common language in the SEL program. So we really recommend that you do that so that it isn't just your school counselor or even just your counselor and your teachers, but it's all of the adults on campus and also your families. So, okay, I just wanted to pause here and see if Sarah has anything to add to this. Sarah works with so many schools on, really doing this throughout the day. Do you have any tips for involving families or just engaging the rest of the school, Sarah?
Amy, I just want to say, first off, that I think your point about the intentionality of teaching the materials is really important and really valuable. And I think that same thing extends to families. Intentionality of communicating with families, and a piece of the cultural relevancy, cultural responsiveness to the different families that you've got in your school district. Because SEL is about particular skills and relationships with others for one point, but different cultures may, for example, greet each other differently. Not everybody uses handshakes. When you're more familiar with people, you may use hugs, but you may have some cultures where either of those is not actually part of the way they approach people. So being intentional about what you're talking about and how you're talking with the families and acknowledging their differences to approach certain kinds, not the skill itself, which is about connecting to other people, but how they do that, I think is really valuable.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think, cultural relevance is going to have a lot of importance in terms of the impact of your SEL program. And certainly whenever we talk about engaging families or even working with all the different kids in your school community, having really focusing on that cultural relevance lens is really important. So thank you. And is there anything, Sarah, both as a client success manager and also as a Second Step mom, do you have anything else that you might point out to schools as far as effective family engagement?
Well, I think the most important thing is sending those family communications home. Not every family will engage, and you have to be ready for that. you'll see that with all of your academic skills as well, right? Not every family will engage. Some will engage in some areas, but the most important step is to get the communication to them, so that they can do what reinforcement they will, and also balance it out into their own cultural talk to their students, to their children in that way, from home. And again, not everybody will respond, and you can't expect that. I think that the best you can do is to make sure you're doing consistent, regular communication.
Nice. And also, we're going to be doing a webinar on engaging families with SEL later in October. So stay tuned for that, and look to our website, and hopefully you can join us for a webinar on engaging families with SEL. So holistic SEL reaches the child across developmental stages. So SEL should be supported across time. Developmentally appropriate and consistent exposure is important. So we at Committee for Children have our classroom curriculum from preschool up through grade 8. We also have an SEL for adults program that extends on to high school for your teachers. But yeah, it's important to keep doing it. So, it's not just going to be like a 6th grade program or a 9th grade program, that you really should be doing it all the way through their school career. So in practice, what does this look like? It looks like developmentally appropriate curriculum from early learning through high school, and also grade differentiated SEL programming throughout the school year. And this is where also too, just having sort of assemblies and posters in the hallway, you're also missing opportunities, if you're just doing, that kind of thing across your school, but then you're not doing the actual skill level programming at each grade level, you're missing out on a lot of opportunity to do this work well. So holistic SEL supports educators' social emotional well-being. Teachers' well-being is a strong predictor of classroom quality. A stronger predictor than even teacher educational attainment and experience. Relationships are key. Positive adult-child relationships play a key role in advancing equity through SEL. So I just want to pause here for a big moment on this slide to say teachers' SEL is really, really important. And it's important on so many different levels. First of all, you can't teach skills you don't have. That's important. Second of all, teaching is an incredibly stressful job, and we are asking so much of our teachers, and giving them really good supports in terms of their own stress management, resiliency skills, giving them all the skills that they need to work with kids, to create a strong team among teaching staff. All of these things are going to be really important for your kids, and they're also going to be important for things like teacher retention and having just a really strong and positive community among adults in your schools provides a foundation for the work that you all do with kids. We at Committee for Children just last spring released an SEL for Adults curriculum. It's a program that is a program that a school staff would do together, where all the teachers learn skills about managing stress and resilience, creating a community among teachers. We have an advancing equity module. And we're going to continue to build on this curriculum over time, but this is a really great way to do SEL for adults. There are also other strategies, but I think if you really value SEL in your school, then you need to also really value that for the teachers. So that is what we know from research. In practice, like I said, this includes adult SEL programs that provide learning and ongoing practice, staff training and supports to help educators develop positive relationships with children, and training that provides understanding of how to create a culture of belonging. So, I don't know, is there anything you want to add, Sarah, about just involving your teachers and your adults?
I think other than the fact that we all know it's not the easiest thing to do, but to be open and to do explicit social emotional work with them as well. That you're practicing those skills with each other. And that's a great, important value for modeling to students.
Yeah. And I also would add too that, I think all of us have a goal of making our schools the best places we can for kids. We want our schools to feel welcoming and inclusive. And, we want every kid to show up every day feeling connected, having friends, really having the best environment for them to thrive. And I think we should also make a goal of having that the case for teachers. Like, why not? Let's make our school the best place to work. Let's have our school be the school in the district that all the teachers want to work at, that is known for having such a good, positive, and welcoming and inclusive environment for teachers and staff, and so that the new teachers who are just starting their teaching careers have mentors and they feel connected, and we have staff retention, and there's a positive environment that feels really supportive and inclusive among adults, because that is going to make teachers want to come to school and to feel supported. And like I said, we all know teaching is an incredibly stressful job, and your teachers need all the support they can get. So by having a foundation of SEL for adults, you're helping to create a really positive place to work, which is great for your teachers and great for your kids. So holistic SEL supports a positive implementation environment. Culture and climate are so important to SEL outcomes that they're often considered a foundational element of SEL program implementation. School-wide implementation is more beneficial to school culture and climate than implementations that bring SEL to just some of the school's classrooms, and high-quality implementation leads to better outcomes. Principal support, which shapes the implementation environment, also influences SEL outcomes. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here, and I'm guessing we have a few school counselors on the line here, and we love our school counselors. You've always been, the champions and friends of Committee for Children in this work. And we also know that many of you are going into classrooms to teach these lessons. And I think that when we talk about SEL just to some of the school classrooms, I think most of the counselor-led implementations end up being that, because you're only one person. And in fact, many counselors have 2 or 3 different buildings. So that's the other thing, I think, also why we really want to encourage a teacher-taught program, because we really want all the classrooms, all the lessons, in order to do a program with fidelity, any program, not just Second Step, but whatever you're doing, having the classroom teachers teach it is what's going to allow that to be the case. And we also know some of you work in environments where that is not always possible, where you are the only person who's teaching it, which is also fine. A lot of great implementations could start as a counselor-led program, but if you are that counselor or that district, think about how maybe next year, or how you can slowly do things to engage your teachers to move that away from being a counselor-led implementation into a full school teacher-taught program. So principal support is super important. I'm going to talk about that more specifically later as one of the obstacles to effective implementation. Oftentimes lack of principal support can be that. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. But yeah, so implementation environment. In practice, this might include a high-quality school-wide implementation, principal and district level leadership and support, intentional systems and structures to support school climate and culture. I wanted to pause here for a minute too we have not really been talking about district level support yet, and I wanted to pause for a minute to talk about that, because if you're joining us from a district office, one of the things that I have personally found really makes a difference too is that if you choose one program and do it well, it's going to be more effective than having, site-based decision-making in many cases. Because I think if the school district says, look, this is the program we're going to do, and then your district office can really get on board, it shows up at your principals' meetings, you can have people who are trained as trainers at your district office, and you can kind of surround your schools with support around your programs. I have found that to be more effective than having each school doing their own thing. And of course, many schools do really great work doing that. But if you're from a district level, I think that you're not going to be able to support 6 different programs that well, where if you have one program or 2 programs, you can become an expert on that program and be more effective at supporting your your schools, and also then, your superintendent, your director of education, you can have those folks at your district office really aware of that program and also supporting. I don't know. Do you have anything to say, Sarah? I know this implementation environment is very squarely in your wheelhouse. You work with this every day. Any other tips?
I would say that you've covered them primarily. I just put a note in the chat about those counselor-led implementations because I work with a lot of those. I think it's important no matter what that everybody in the school has the training, a little bit of information, the onboarding, and that's why that principal leadership is so important, is because it's not just about having the environment, but it's also about being able to communicate with all staff, not just those who are the lesson facilitators, not just those who are the classroom teachers, but everybody who might be reinforcing the skills. So with a counselor-led, it's even more important to make sure that the teachers are aware of what's being taught, that the reinforcements are sent home, or not sent home, right? Sent into the classroom, sent to the teachers so that they, I think about them as essentially a family. If you're doing everything's in the classroom, you're sending home to the families. Well, the first step for the counselor-led is sending into the classrooms so that they can anticipate, reflect, and reinforce with their students in the classrooms and on the playground when the counselor isn't present.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And also, too, I would note, too, if you're a counselor, also to really try to get onto staff meeting calendars as often as you can. In second step, we have a principal toolkit that comes along with the program. You can access that on your secondstep.org account. And I'm sure if you have other programs, there's something like that, too. But we have a lot of staff meeting activities and things that you can do to try to engage your teachers. And this is the case even if your teachers are teaching the program, but certainly if they're not teaching and you are the one teaching it, then those are even more important to get that reinforcement. So just to recap, holistic SEL, providing SEL throughout the child's day, reaching the child across developmental stages throughout their school career, supporting educators' social emotional competencies and well-being, and supporting a positive implementation environment. So we're really talking about, like I said, kind of surrounding the child, all day throughout their career, in out of school time, SEL for adults, all that reinforcement, having an explicit skill-based program such as Second Step, and involving families and community organizations as well. So that's kind of the overall North Star of what we're looking to do with SEL, of really having that be to where, we kind of live and breathe SEL in our schools. That is what we're looking to do. And I can imagine for many of you, that seems like kind of a lofty goal. Perhaps you're in an environment where maybe your principal doesn't even have an interest in SEL. Maybe you've had 2 or 3 other curriculum adoptions in the last year and you feel like your, second step program is sort of set to the wayside. Or, there's just so much stress right now in schools, and there's so many things that can make, really that level of SEL feeling like, like something that is almost unattainable. So I think that we need to look to John F. Kennedy here. I like this quote: "Every accomplishment starts with a decision to try." So no matter where you are on the continuum of SEL implementation, whether you're doing a great job really throughout the day, or you're just one teacher doing it in your one classroom, maybe you don't even have an SEL program yet. No matter where you are in that continuum, there are a lot of great things you can do to move the needle to the next level. And I'll tell you, after my many years of doing this work, I cannot even tell you how many really excellent district-wide implementations have started out because one person had energy to do SEL. And so even if you really are just that one school counselor in your building, you're the only one, just know that probably 50% of the excellent school district implementations that I have worked with started out with something very, very small. And the seeds, you plant those seeds and they grow. SEL is very contagious. It works. It is super positive. Once you can get teachers teaching it, they like doing it. Kids like it. Families like it. So, no matter where you are, I just hope that I can instill some feeling of inspiration and optimism, because there's nothing negative about wherever you are on the continuum of implementation, because really there's so much possibility, and all you need to do is not worrying about necessarily getting to the end goal, but thinking about what is one next thing that I can do just to move the needle in my school. What's another seed that I can plant at the next staff meeting? Where can I go to just keep moving in that direction? So we're going to talk now about some of the things that are barriers to that work, because we know that, I'm guessing that every person on this call today is here because we're preaching to the choir here. I'm very sure of that. So let's talk about some of the challenges that you're facing from getting to where you are now to where you want to be. And these are some of the obstacles that I came up with, that I have heard often from our clients over the years. And I think lack of principal buy-in is probably one that many of you on the line here today are dealing with. Lack of teacher buy-in. Maybe you feel like you don't have the resources for funding. There's something, I refer to it as kind of initiative overload, which is really about having just too many things. You can't ask someone to prioritize 18 different things. And I think that your teachers are being asked to prioritize everything. And so having them prioritize SEL can be lost in a wash of prioritizing everything. So time, there's not enough time to teach. We've got all these things we need to teach. We don't have time to do SEL. Maybe you have too many different SEL strategies. Maybe you're doing a couple of different SEL programs. You've got a character education program. You've got Second Step. You're doing Kelso's Choice. You have your, you have your PBIS implementation. You've got all these different things happening, and you haven't put them together in a cohesive package for teachers to digest them as one thing. Or there's no accountability. Maybe everyone was given a Second Step license, and then there's not really an expectation that it's going to be taught. So these are some of the things that I see as obstacles. And we'd love for you to type into the chat box some of the things that you're experiencing. And while you do that, maybe Sarah, do you want to share do you have any additional things that maybe you might hear from some of your schools?
I want to say that you said it all pretty much there. I probably am missing something, but I think the obstacles are real. And that's the key to remember. And that it's not always about busting down the obstacles. It's sometimes about working within what we have. You only have so much capacity. You only have so many people you're going to get buy-in with in a particular year. You're always going to have resistors, maybe fewer if you're doing a really great job, or you just have the best school environment. But I think that accepting those obstacles and then working within and around them.
And what's the most common one that you tend to hear, like out of this list, which is the one that you most commonly hear with your clients?
I would say it's either the first or the second. Either it's not having principal buy-in, and that's oftentimes on those counselor-led, where the counselor is responsible, and sometimes even it's purchased through the counseling department at the district, and the principals are sort of brought in. Some principals will then be okay and excited, and some principals will then not be. And the other side is on teacher buy-in. Even when you have a great principal leadership, you often have look, we're so overwhelmed. Everybody, but teachers especially, with this pandemic, have just been given an overload, I think, of trying, and it's a combination of having to meet your students in their trauma and their experience and their coming back, and our own experience of trauma, that the pandemic experience has been very real, plus being asked to add more to our schedule every day. And so we really see you, and I think that both, like, not having that teacher buy-in is coming in. We want to acknowledge that it's not because they don't want to necessarily. It could be simply the amount of things they're being asked to do.
And I think research speaks to that too. I remember seeing one study that was done. I think it was a CASEL study where they surveyed thousands of teachers, and like 98% of them thought that SEL was important for all kids. But I think probably many of those teachers also, feel that they just can't do one more thing. They can't, and I think, so that, right. It's not about lack of buy-in for the importance of SEL. It's more about lack of buy-in for, like, I just can't do one more thing. Right. And I think that those two things are very related, lack of principal buy-in and lack of teacher buy-in, in the sense that, like, if you have a principal who's really dedicated to SEL, who's really committed to it, who says, look, our school really prioritizes SEL, we're a second step school, then your teachers will follow. And I think also if you have a principal who doesn't seem focused on SEL, but all your teachers really believe it and want to do it, well, then your principal will follow. So if you lack one of those two things, you can use the other one to get the other one, if that makes sense. You can use teacher buy-in to get principal buy-in, and you can use principal buy-in to get teacher buy-in, like if one of those things. And if you lack both, then sometimes you just start with seeds. You go with the goers. Like Sarah said, you're never going to get 100% of your teachers excited to do SEL. But if you can get a core group of teachers who really are enthusiastic about it, and you can have them, maybe they pilot a program, maybe you make it a voluntary thing where those teachers start out at first, and then as they get they promote it, then other teachers jump on board.
And I think that's a great point, Amy. And really, so we had Gina shared with us that parent and community lack of buy-in or misunderstandings about what SEL is can be a barrier. And I know that there are districts this year in particular who have slowed down their implementation in order to share with parents exactly what it is that the programs are teaching. And when it comes down to the skills that are being taught, and I think that's where Gina mentioned misunderstandings about what SEL is. When it comes down to the skills, I think everybody wants those skills that we're teaching with social emotional learning, being able to communicate with each other, being able to grow and to work, to work with goals in, build those goals out by small chunk to those larger goals. People want those skills in their kids and in their families and their communities, but they're not clear that that's what is being taught. So I think those barriers are very real as well.
Right. Thank you for pointing that out, Sarah. I think that is also very true.
Well, thanks to Gina.
Yeah, and then I think, I think one of the things I found with Second Step is when you have some sort of, I wouldn't even say it's pushback from families as much as it's a lack of clarity. I think sometimes even showing the scope and sequence for Second Step, just showing what the lessons are and really highlighting how you're learning skills, and it's skills about managing emotions and getting along with each other and making friends and solving problems. And, I think that usually when you have families that are unsure of doing Second Step, if you actually bring them in, let them look at the curriculum, let them look at the scope and sequence, that really almost always overcomes those barriers. But yeah, you can reach out to us if you want to talk more about that. But so I think addressing lack of buy-in, I had a special slide just for this question because this is really where everything lies in your SEL program. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities to promote SEL. So I think staff meetings is one of them. I think promoting SEL with your families. I think if your families expect that SEL is being taught and they want it to get taught, then that often is a way to bring your principal and your teachers, to bring them on to that. I think also to promote the research finding on SEL. So if, sometimes I think it's important to speak to the head and the heart. So, I think we talk to the heart in the sense of really talking about, how we're helping kids to really develop skills to make more friends and to create, schools that promote belonging and inclusivity. But also, this work is founded on a really strong foundation of research, and also about the research in terms of the links between doing SEL and academics. I think that those things are all really, can be really helpful with Buyin. Discuss the why of SEL. I really like videos for this. There's some really great videos. CASEL has some. We have a bunch of Committee for Children. Edutopia has good videos. I think some of those like sort of heart-touching, feel-good videos about SEL are great to play at staff meetings and at family nights and things like that to help, sort of pull the heartstrings and bring that why. I think using an assessment tool also can be helpful in the sense that when you get kind of a baseline of where your kids are at in terms of what skills they currently have, I think, you can also use like a school climate survey to see, if your kids feel like they belong, do they feel connected, those kinds of questions. And if you use the data from your assessment, I think that can be a good way to increase buy-in, because teachers can then see, gosh, in our school, this is how our kids are feeling, or, some of the things. So that can make a difference. And then I think my last bullet point is the most important. And then once you've done all that, do it again and again and again. There's no point where you ever get to plant your flag on the top of the mountain and say, we are an SEL school, like that can happen. And then 3 months later, you have a new math curriculum adoption, you have a new principal, you have a crisis like what we've been going through. And then all of a sudden, the focus can move off of your second step program or your SEL program. So you're always going to be needing to bring it back and keep it front and center. That's why in second step, in the principal toolkit, we have all these different staff meeting activities so that you can continually keep it in front of your staff, engage new teachers. You're always going to be needing to continually promote second step, because you're always going to have lots of other competing initiatives and competing things that take away time and resources. What about you, Sarah? Any other ideas for addressing lack of buy-in? You talk about this every day, all day.
I think I would just go back to, you said a lot about the why, but I think the what is really core. And sometimes, again, when you're just saying, we're going to implement this program, it's an SEL program, a social emotional learning program, that's not enough. So really being clear about what's being taught and how it's valuable for the other academic lessons that are being taught. I think that's big for the buy-in across teachers and, because teachers are so often like, but we have to have all these math skills. So being able to say these skills, what are these skills that are going to help them? Not just say, oh, this is going to help you with those, but what are the skills that are going to help you? And how are they going to help you get those math skills, and how are they going to help you with that? I think that's helpful for buy-in across the board, teachers, families especially.
I also want to take a second, too, to kind of point out for those of you that work in school district offices, I would also say, too, that every time you can get on the calendar of a principal meeting, even if it's 5 minutes, I know that they're hard to get on those principal meetings. I know every minute is like gold in those meetings, but even if you can get 5 minutes, 10 minutes to talk about it with your principals, talk about it with your school board, I think that the more, and then also, too, if you already have a program like Second Step in your district, I bet you have at least a couple of schools that are doing an excellent job with that. And so if you can have those principals be the ones to speak at your principal meeting, rather than you as, maybe you're a student support person, but if you can have a principal who's doing a great job of SEL, talk to the other principals, I think that that's a great way to do it. But I think also to really engage your superintendent, your school board, all of the other, your director of curriculum, your director of research, like all of those folks, and even your public relations people, your public relations people this is a good story to tell. Doing SEL in your district is a good story to tell. And your PR people probably want a good story to tell because they are always out there, dealing with all the things that are happening. And for them to proactively get out in front of your local media and talk about positive things that they're doing in their schools to, reduce bullying and to create inclusive environments and to teach kids problem solving, like that's going to be a good thing for them. And so the more you can do all these different things, the more it builds. And then I said, and then again and again and again, because you're going to do that. And then a year later, you have a new language arts adoption. And then, and then second step all of a sudden isn't on every staff meeting calendar. So then you're going to need to, to continually buoy it up. And also, like I said, go with the goers and use you already have great champions probably in your other principals and teachers, and have, those people who really believe in SEL help you to champion SEL, because you're probably not alone in your school or district with other people who think that as well. So time and initiative overload. Again, I think that this is something that you're going to hear from people is we don't have time. We can't do one more thing. And I think that again goes back to buy-in, because if you really had the buy-in, then you find the time, so, and I think initiative overload to me is really more the thing than even time, in the sense of like, we're asking our teachers to prioritize so many different things. And so I think that having SEL as it's where it is carved out on your school calendar, where, every Tuesday, second period is second step at your middle school, or however you want to do it. But if it's really on your calendar and there's an expectation that it is taught, to make it a requirement. So it's not optional. I think that's one of the mistakes I see schools doing, where the principal doesn't want to ask for one more thing. So they offer second step as like, oh, here's another tool that you can use in your toolkit, which is optional. And mostly nowadays, teachers are so swamped that if you offer something that's optional, many of them are going to option not to do it because they're so overwhelmed. So I think principals should get behind it and say this is actually required, rather than. But also, I think sometimes you can have a transition year where sometimes for the first year, maybe you have it where it's like a soft implementation, where maybe the first year you really focus on getting the teachers bought in. Teaching, maybe the first unit and then the second unit, like as a optional thing or something. I think that there are ways that it can be built up where if you feel like this year we're already doing a math curriculum and a language arts adoption, I really don't want to ask for a whole other curriculum adoption. Well, there are ways you can kind of say, okay, well, this is going to be year one, and then next year in year two, we're gonna do it. And I think if you're in that kind of environment, you could even say this year we're going to start with SEL for adults. We're going to start just doing SEL for adults, and then next year we're going to bring in the SEL, the second step or whatever your curriculum is into all the classrooms. Or this year we're starting as counselor led, and then next year it goes to be all teachers. But if you tell teachers that's coming, then it doesn't sort of come. It doesn't feel as sort of heavy. If you say, look, this year the counselor is going to be supporting, and then next year we have the expectation you'll be doing all of the lessons. Those are kind of some ways you can do it. But I also do think that you only get one chance to make a first impression. And by going in really strong and with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, that probably also is the best way to get a really strong implementation. Because if it starts out sort of like tentative and weak, it's harder to bring that energy later. Where if you start out really full on, we are excited, this is our commitment, here's our curriculum, here's all the ways we're going to do it, then that I think can be really, really powerful to come in and do it really strong in that way. So I just put a couple bullet points here of some of the things that I see schools kind of not doing that well, that I just wanted to kind of highlight because perhaps these are areas where you might want to think about. So involving your out-of-school time programs, involving families, staff meetings, school assemblies, morning announcements. That's another thing that I think is an opportunity to create more of that reinforcement. and integrating SEL with your other initiatives. So if you are a PBIS school, to integrate your SEL curriculum into your PBIS program. If you have, for example, a character of the month that you do, integrate your SEL program in with that so your teachers see it as one thing. So the more things you can integrate together, it adds, because if your teachers think, well, why are we doing second step when we already do PBIS, So if you can explain how those things support, then it's more likely, it increases buy-in. And like we've been saying again and again, buy-in really is everything. So we believe at Committee for Children, we have a lot of resources that can help you to do all of these things well. We are very committed to supporting our clients with holistic SEL. And like I said, there are also other really great programs out there. We know that there's a lot of our other partner organizations in the field who provide excellent quality research-based approaches as well. But we know Second Step is something that's been around for many, many years, and we know that many of you are doing it. And for those of you that aren't, we would love to talk with you more about how Second Step can help you meet these needs. Second Step goes from early learning through middle school. We also have bullying prevention and child protection. For elementary, bullying prevention is embedded in our middle school program. And we also have, for those of you that may not be aware of this, we have an out-of-school time version of Second Step. We have an SEL for Adults program that was released just a few months ago that we are excited about. And we have a few minutes left here to continue to answer your questions. So if you have those, please type them in the chat box. Otherwise, I know Sarah and I certainly have lots more advice to share with you in terms of, taking your SEL program from good to great. But I just wanted to be sure and leave time for questions. Are there any questions that have come up, Sarah, that you want to share?
Yeah, there is one, and it's not one that I'm the best at answering, but maybe you have an answer for it. Can you talk more about the differences between Second Step and PBIS goals?
Sure. So many schools, positive behavior positive behavior interventions and support PBIS schools use a program like Second Step, because basically, if you are a PBIS school, you have basically, I wish I had a graphic here of the pyramid. So you have Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 interventions in terms of supporting kids with both academics and behavior. And so Second Step is designed as a Tier 1 program, meaning that Second Step teaches skills to all of the kids. And hopefully the goal of that is that if you teach good SEL skills to all of your kids, there are less kids who need Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. Tier 2 supports are where you pull groups of kids together that need extra support. And then Tier 3 is when you're working individually one-on-one with kids who have specific needs. So Second Step also in some schools is used as a Tier 2 program. It was not designed that way, and it is not researched as such. So we always like to put that caveat in there that Second Step was designed as a Tier 1 program. However, we hear from many of our clients that they also use Second Step as a Tier 2 program and have great results in that. And also working individually with kids, there's a lot of language that you can use from Second Step that supports that. So I guess my point is, if you're a PBIS school and you're doing Second Step, what you should talk about is how Second Step is a support to your PBIS framework. So PBIS is a framework, and Second Step is a part of that. So it's not a separate thing. Sarah has put in the chat box there an alignment chart that shows more details on that, and you can share that with your school staff and your principals. Because again, if you're doing anything else that you're doing that's around this, the more you can speak about how they go together, the less it can feel like that overwhelm of teachers being asked to do many things. If they can realize that Second Step can be a part of the PBIS framework, then that is, that supports something that you're already doing. So that was a really short answer to a complicated question. So reach out to us if you want to talk more about how Second Step can support your PBIS implementation, or check out the alignment chart that Sarah just sent. But great question.
I have another question. I'm not sure how much of it is a question and how much of it is just a point of fact, really. As a counselor, crisis situations cause problems trying to keep several groups on the same page. I think that is just, when we're thinking about what's going on in the Gulf Coast area and the hurricane season and how that shuts down schools, on top of everything else. It seems like you have individual students, then you have family issues that are going on, then you have something in one classroom. I'm just imagining all of the different layers that are potential there. I don't know, Jean, if you had more of a question there. It's about keeping the different groups on the same page, and I think that's about that school-wide implementation, maintaining a consistency of where you are in the program across the board.
Well, I think, when it comes to a crisis situation, I think SEL is really essential. And also too, it's if you have an SEL program already, when a crisis situation comes up, then you can draw on the program that you already have to help with that. So one of the things in Second Step, we're always advocating for doing implementation with fidelity, meaning teach all the lessons in order as they're intended to be taught. However, you can have a situation the third week of school where there is a crisis, and maybe, there's a lesson on Second Step that is lesson 15 that you haven't gotten to yet that is about, managing strong emotions. And, and also I always recommend to schools that you teach the program in order, but also you can also use it as a tool in your toolkit, in the sense that if you have a lesson in Second Step that is out of order, but really this week you need to teach about strong emotions, by all means go and pull that as a resource for this week and do that. But then also, but then continue to teach in order in addition to that, if that makes sense. So, and you'll have to adapt. Anytime you go and grab a lesson that's out of order, you'll have to adapt because it refers back to the lesson before and things like that. But I think, when you're in a crisis, you should absolutely draw on your SEL program to help with that, because it's, it's helpful. And it's also, I think, a point of why it's important to do this kind of preventative SEL, as a prevention program and also as a tier 1 program, so that when you have a crisis such as COVID or such as, what's happening in the Southwest or the South right now, or in other parts of the country, when you have crisis, when you already have a program, you have that to draw on in times of crisis too. So, yeah.
So the next question is also, I think, related in terms of the resources we might provide. Does Second Step offer any tier 2 or 3 activities for small groups or individuals? And what I'm thinking about, Amy, are the things that we have, like the community rebuilding unit. These are free resources that we have that are outside of the program, and they are designed for all grades. They are grade band oriented. For community rebuilding, we have some resilience activities, which I think are really helpful for those kinds of supports. And then our class meeting packs that we initially, I think, created some of these as a result of COVID, but now they are becoming an extra support for any kind of tier 2 or responsive moment when the schools in the South come back. I know New Orleans, for example, right? They lost days of school because of a hurricane. Well, that's probably going to happen again. How do you come back in after that? One of the ways you come back in after that is by backing up. So to the question of, are the students falling behind because one class has missed more lessons than another class? I think the answer to that is really about bringing them all back in and reinforcing and reviewing and going back to things like these community rebuilding units and class meetings, because we all are learning, I think you mentioned this before, we all are learning the skills, we all are using the skills every day, but we may need reinforcements in one area. It doesn't matter if one group in the school falls behind in the particular lessons, really, because everybody's using every lesson, every skill every day. And it's a matter of bringing those students up to speed as they can, not rushing, but bringing up to speed as they can go. And I'm going to put a link in the chat box for our Site Leaders Implementation page, resource page, which will have links to those community rebuilding units and the resilience modules, for example.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And it looks like we're just about out of time here, but I'm so, I know we've had a lot to cover. This is a lot to cover in an hour. And I hope we have inspired you to take your SEL program to the next level. I know no matter where you are, there's always one more step you can take to have it become more deeply embedded in your school. And all these things are going to make a big difference for your kids. We know SEL work is hard. And we know your job is never done. We know that there's, like I said, there's no point when you get to plant your flag on the top of the mountain and say you have achieved, an SEL school. It is never that way. It is hard work, and it is continuous work, and it also is so, so worth it. It benefits your kids so much. I hope we've also given you a little inspiration to do more for your teachers around adult SEL, and we really thank you for joining us today. We know your time is incredibly valuable, and we hope we've given you some ideas for taking your SEL program from good to great. We have a lot more webinars that can help you more specifically about our curriculum, and also, there's just a lot of other great stuff on our website that we think can help you to do this work. So thank you for joining us, and please stay in touch and come to another one of our events and visit our website anytime.
Thanks, Amy. We're getting a lot of gratitude in the chat, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated and brought your questions and brought your experience as well. That's really terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, we're a nonprofit organization, and we could not do our work if it wasn't for all of you out there in the field. So we are very, very grateful for you, because it wouldn't matter how great our curriculum was. If you weren't out there doing this work, we would not be able to impact the millions of kids that we are. So we thank you. We consider you very much partners in the work, and we appreciate spending an hour with you here this morning. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day.